Welcome to the HOAM Front, your gateway to a new era of living. Here, PropTech meets people and smart neighborhoods come alive. Together, we'll explore the innovations transforming property management, the trends transforming how we live together, and the breakthrough tools that are making HOAs more connected, intuitive, and efficient. It's not just tech, it's the future of community. Let's jump in.
Welcome back to the HOAM Front Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Brock, and it's great to have you here with us today. We have two very special guests with us today. For those of you who might not be aware, the city of Frisco, straddling the counties of both Denton and Collin County in the North DFW Metroplex, has been one of the fastest growing cities in America for the last decade. From about 33,000 residents in the year 2000 to over 250,000 this year, the growth has been astronomical. There have been some interesting components of that growth along the way, things that cities all around the country are studying, including the partnership between the Dallas Cowboys and the Frisco school system, where the Cowboys have a training facility that the schools then use to play football games in during the football season. The PGA has moved its headquarters to the area with 3 championship golf courses, and we believe the PGA tournament will soon be coming to the area. The Universal Studios is also in the process of building a kids resort not too far away from the National Soccer Hall of Fame. Now, I bet you can imagine, with all of this growth, there's a lot of challenges that come with that, but also a lot of great policies that have been put in place along the way to help facilitate that growth. So the leaders we have with us today, 2 folks who have been literally on the front lines helping to facilitate that growth. The first is Shona Sowell. She was a former city councilwoman and now leading candidate for the mayor of the city of Frisco. And Jared Patterson, state representative of District 106, which includes not only the city of Frisco, but all of the surrounding areas that are also exploding in growth. Jared, Shona, it's great to have you here today.
It's good to be here.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for being.
So as I mentioned, good grief, on the front lines, really, of astronomical growth. Kind of the first thing that comes to mind is a lot of that growth came from a business environment, really, that attracted businesses, that caused a lot of relocations, a lot of families moving to the area. Can we kind of start there from a business approach, a business framework? What were some of the policies that you all kind of worked hand in hand together to create this kind of environment?
Well, I'll start a little bit, and then Jared could talk more about state level kind of business environment. But certainly in the city of Frisco, one of the things that we did early on was to invest in our Economic Development Corporation and our Community Development Corporation. Mm-hmm. And what that allowed us to do was to take money that was coming in from sales tax and to use it to incentivize businesses and job growth to come to the area. And while those started out smaller, I think one of the first projects they did was an infrastructure piece for a restaurant that came into town years and years ago. It then certainly grew into infrastructure projects to bring in larger companies and some of the bigger projects that you'll see around Hall Park and some of the other developments that we have, certainly with the Fields development. And that allowed us to be a big player on the stage when it came to attracting businesses. And I think that's important because when businesses have a lot of options to choose from, it's not just about where they're going to go, where the infrastructure's there, but it's also going to go where they can bring their families and where it's going to set up home for them. And all of those things have to work together. And I think that's something that the city of Frisco has done a really good job in partnering to make it a business-friendly community, but also a come and build your home here and your life here.
Yeah. Well, and when I moved to town, fall of 2010, one of the stories that used to be told also was some creative marketing. I mean, there was a story that, I don't know if it was the mayor at the time, but had dump trucks and bulldozers just kind of pushing dirt around along the highway to make it appear.
That's what they did. They they rented they used some economic development money when they didn't have very much, and they rented a bulldozer to go and move dirt on a piece of property close to 121 that would make it look like things were getting ready to be built there. So you make it look exciting, you make it look interesting. And I don't know that brings you great business down the line, because it certainly, but it does make people, they just wanted to be creative about getting on the map. Frisco's important. There's going to be growth here. The tollway is going to go through here. And once that happens, you're going to see an explosion of people wanting to be here. And so then it was, how do we make it, how do we attract the right things?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Jared, what about from your point of view?
I think I grew up in a small town north of Frisco, and we grew up with Frisco. Oh yeah, and we grew up playing Frisco in sports. And my hometown is still pretty small, and Frisco obviously is huge with 13 high schools and 250,000 people. And so it's just amazing the amount of growth that's gone on there, as you mentioned. I think there's a number of reasons why Frisco has been so successful. I think first and foremost, the education system in Frisco, having parents that are involved in their child's education, having teachers that love their students, and for us and a lot of other families, moving to Frisco because of the school system was imperative. I think it's also because of good planning. George Purefoy, at one point, the Tom Landry of Frisco, the only coach the Cowboys ever had and the only city manager Frisco ever had for so long, and other leaders. I think it's also, though, folks that put their blood, sweat, and tears into building a business. And I think that what we've done at the state level is kind of tap into that history of Texas of people willing to risk it all to be successful. And we've helped try to create that stable legal environment, that business climate, that ability for someone to succeed here if they're willing to take that risk. And so from the state level, we've done that through various ways. Most recently, I would say through the Texas business courts that we created, to have our businesses who have complex legal issues to be able to go before a court that can handle complex legal issues for businesses. I think businesses across the country and even across the world are seeing what we've got here in Texas, and especially what we've got in Frisco, and want a piece of that. And I think that's why you're seeing businesses continue to invest, sometimes to the tune of billions of dollars, to come into the state of Texas.
We were talking to John Cornyn not too long ago, U.S. Senator, and I was telling him, one of the things that struck me fairly quickly when I moved to Texas was this cultural inherent optimism that just exists with people who live in Texas, that, the sky is the limit, no matter how hard the challenge, there's nothing but opportunity.
Yes.
And, that's just part of the culture. But what you both were saying was basically finding policies that then help kind of strengthen and kind of promote that culture, so that people can really succeed in really an opportunity-rich area.
A lot of times the government tends to get in the way of that. And so I think what and I know Shona's focused on this during her career on the city council, and certainly I've focused on this at the state level, is to make sure that not only are we not putting up those additional barriers for businesses to be able to thrive and business people to be able to thrive, but also trying to figure out what that next policy is, what that next change needs to be for the future, for the businesses of the future, that are going to be very different. Texas is far more diverse now than what it was 20 or 30 years ago when it was primarily, agriculture and oil and gas. Now there's a heavy tech industry and so many other things here. Yep. And so we constantly have to be competing with other states and other nations to make sure that we've got the best opportunity for people that want to take that risk to be able to do so.
Jared brings up a really good point. One of the things that we focused on in Frisco was that we had to have a diversity of economic gain. It couldn't be that we certainly like to call ourselves Sports City USA, right? That has become a focus. And,
for sure.
And that's part of some of the magic that's happened. But also we have to be diverse in the companies that we attract. If we only attract a certain industry, if we only attract certain types of companies, well, when a recession hits, you're setting your city up and your environment up for a crash. And so if you've got diversity of economic structure, then it allows for the ebbs and flows of the economy to ride it out. And I think that's been something that we've really done a good job of focusing on is just making sure that we attract tech companies. We look at healthcare companies. We look at those who are involved in sports in some way. But we also look at financial companies that could come in. So when you have that mixture of economic environment and business environment, it allows you to be a little safer during times that are going to come and downturns.
You talk about that diversity, but, also just brings to mind the ethnic diversity in the city of Frisco. Mm-hmm. I think people, when they hear Texas, they think a certain thing. Yep. And it is absolutely the opposite of that stereotype in the city of Frisco, and literally a multicultural community that feels like a small town that still feels like community, which is rare.
Yeah, I think that's a key part of it is that, one, the school district is such a key component in what we're doing, right? Okay. It is, and that's whether you go to whatever school you go to in the city. People are so invested in the school communities that gives them a sense of connectedness. And so I think because the schools are not, now they're bigger than, what you might see in your small towns, when they're smaller than under 2,200 students at the high school level, I think that allows for people to really engage. And you end up knowing a whole lot of the people that your kids are going to school with, the parents. A lot of them are neighborhood schools. And so once you've got that connectedness, the cultural diversity still exists, but you have commonalities because you're all pulling the same direction. Mm-hmm. And you may have come from different areas, you may have different jobs, but you're finding things to be connected on. And I think that really matters, that it is still smaller communities within a bigger community as we've grown. And I think because we do things that, as simple as the community parade, we don't have 13 homecoming parades. We have one homecoming parade that we also celebrate our veterans at, and it's the community parade where everyone participates in. So it allows you to feel like it's a small town parade with the fire trucks coming through and the bands coming through, but it's all of the high schools coming together to do it at one time, and we all come together as a community for that.
Graduating in the same arena.
Absolutely. Everybody
playing
graduates.
Football in the same arena.
That's right. It's not that each school has their own individual, they all have their own personalities, but they all play in the same arenas and rotate around. And I will say from raising, I know you've raised 3 kids in the district. I've raised 4 kids in the district. Yeah. Knowing that as we've done that our kids knew somebody in pretty much every school, whether that was from church or other activities that they were involved in. So when we played one of the other schools, they usually had friends on the other team. Sure. So it was part of that community, part of it as well. It wasn't that it was our school and we only knew people at our school. There is that community piece of it that they know somebody all over town. And that, I think, contributes to it as well.
And that's such a weird thing, too, because when I was growing up in a small town that had one elementary, one middle school, and one high school, we hated the other kids at the other schools.
For sure.
I mean, we would know
mascots and all the things, right?
And we would know 1 or 2 kids at another school and, and this and that. We'd rag on them. Well, most of my kids' friends at his middle school ended up being zoned for a different high school than where my kid goes to. And so he's got some of his best friends go to a different school. Wow. And then through playing sports and AAU basketball, he knows kids at a lot of the different high schools, and they're all friends. And that's just, a difference not only in I think Frisco versus a real small town, and also just the generational differences as well. But it is a unique environment. Frisco is very blessed to have so many families that pour into their kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Our schools are oftentimes a reflection of the community that we're in. And Frisco's reflection is that of parents who love their kids and want their kids to be successful. And it is a blessing to live there. It's a bubble, but it is certainly a blessing to live there.
Well, and speaking of bubbles, I mean, Shona, you also said it's like bubbles within bubbles. And that is, so much of the residential development has been managed communities, homeowners associations, managed communities, condo, to a certain extent, some condo buildings. But that kind of government within government is also taking place, which really has been critical to the rapid growth of the community. Curious about your thoughts on the role of managed communities in kind of 2 things. 1, kind of preserving and continuing to grow real estate values, and 2, continuing to foster that sense of community.
So I've been part of 2 major neighborhoods in the city of Frisco, and very similar in style, but also in how they work together. And I think one of the things that those neighborhood associations do a little bit is they give you kind of some structure already to make sure your neighborhood thrives and sustainable, right? Like nobody wants to put all this money and effort into moving into a home and taking care of that home only to have the neighborhood go down around you. Nobody wants to do that. And I think having those standards, having it where I know that my street's going to look good, the street across from me is going to look good, that's all helpful in the retaining the value of that neighborhood. I think there's also, you'll see, for good or bad sometimes, right? You see the communities on Facebook, so they've got their own way to communicate. But sometimes that's actually very helpful because you kind of know what's going on in your neighborhood, and you can get information, you can take part in things, you can let people know there's things happening on our neighborhood is constantly saying, hey, I'm having a party at our home, so the traffic's going to be a little heavier on the street. And all that does is help to be friendlier with your neighbors, right? It just helps put the information out. And I find them to be very helpful in just pulling the community together, even though it's not just the people that live on your street. It helps you to kind of engage with people that are on the other side of the neighborhood that you might not necessarily, especially my kids are grown now, so we're not in the school age where we're meeting people that way. So it just helps us to connect in other ways.
Yeah, and be careful serving on your HOA board, because I know a lot of people, that was the first step of them serving in higher office, was first getting involved in their local community through their HOA board. And then all of a sudden they're running for city council, they're running for state rep, they're running for a county position, justice of the peace, whatever. It seems like it always kind of starts, or a lot of times it starts there at that local level.
Satisfaction of public service.
It's the most local connection, I think, for people to have an opportunity to serve locally, but also to be decision makers in what's happening in their own, just at the most hyper-focused level.
And some of those communities, good grief, they literally are the financial size of small corporations. Unbelievable amounts of responsibility, capital oversight, funds that they're having to manage. It's a real job.
Right.
That people are doing just out of the goodness of their heart.
Volunteering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Pivoting from there, with that rapid growth comes infrastructure strain. And I think that the reason it came to mind was homeowners associations are constantly kind of thinking through capital planning and sidewalks and all the things. But from a city level and a regional level, that the massive growth has obviously continued to put strain on all of the infrastructure. Energy. I know Jared is super passionate about that. We had it all kind of came to head a couple of years ago in the big Texas freeze. There's been a lot of conversation about water, road quality, and to a certain extent, I think the city and the region has kept up, but in some cases it feels a little bit like catch up, kind of growing pains. What are y'all's thoughts on that?
It's always going to feel like growing pains when you're bringing 1,000 people a month into a community and moving in. That's always going to feel like some growing strains. But I think the city of Frisco, for the most part, has done a great job in planning for what's going to be coming. There's not as much reactionary. We try to be very proactive on planning for the roads, widening of the roads, creating turn lanes, things like that. But the struggle comes in how are you also adding the infrastructure that you need, but then also planning to how to take care of it 20 years from now. And most of our community is aging at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a key part of it is you can't just plan for today. You've got to plan for how you're going to sustain and take care of these roads once you have them built. And a lot of communities, that's where they struggle, right? They can get the pavement on the ground.
That's right.
But then they can't take care of it because when the growth starts to slow down, what do you do then? And if you've not planned appropriately for that, that then becomes the issue. And I think that's something that the state of Texas is going to have to be very mindful of, is when the growth does slow down, for whatever that reason is, how do we then sustain all of the things and the assets that we've built? How do we maintain it without putting that burden back on the taxpayers? And plan for that. And plan for it to be in a very strategic approach, because it can't just be, well, the road's now falling apart, now we need to do something. There has to be a strategic plan that comes into play. And I think that's probably where the pinch is going to come the most for most communities.
I mean, it literally happened in a much smaller scale. It happens in homeowners associations all the time.
Yeah.
The lack of a long-term plan, the lack of a reserve fund, the lack of a reserve study, and then out of nowhere, homeowners are like, wait, we have this massive special assessment to try and catch up with some massive capital improvement that's critical. That absolutely plays out in government as well. And, it's really important, I think, for all of us to ask our elected officials, what are we doing about that?
Yeah.
Right.
It's really a challenge when you've got, like state of Texas on the whole has 1,600 net new residents every day. 1,600 every day. So when you woke up this morning, there were 1,600 people here that weren't here yesterday. Same thing for tomorrow. And they're not bringing asphalt. They're not bringing transmission wires. They're not bringing water with them.
That's right.
And what's really challenging for infrastructure projects specifically is that whether you're having rapid growth like we're seeing in North Texas or whether you're in Detroit and you're not, it takes the same amount of time to do right-of-way acquisition, engineering and design, moving utilities out of the way, just to build a road, regardless of how fast you're growing. And so I think what we're seeing outside of Frisco in some areas are some really, really strong and intense growing pains because we're in some areas that, maybe aren't in an incorporated city and the rules are different and where they're growing just so rapidly that we can't keep up. And so one of the beauties that Frisco had was they had really good people in place like Shona and others to plan for that growth. But they knew that it was coming. I was on a city council in a small town that grew kind of in the 50s, and then they grew again in the 80s, and then they were growing again in the 2010s. And so it was like, and you're so bound by those decisions that were made decades ago. And sometimes maybe, if you could have planned the whole community at one fell swoop, you would have done things differently. Sure. And so that is the benefit that Frisco's had, is that they kind of all grew in a 20-year period and they knew that it was coming. And so they were able to make those long-term decisions for that. One of the things I wish that they would have done differently in the 80s and maybe in the early 90s was, maybe not zone so many apartment units in Frisco, but, those were decisions that were made then that now somewhat tie the hands. Now. Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. And tie the hands of the locally elected officials now.
That's right. I mean, just for clarity purposes, the reason it's highly controversial is because of the massive population growth.
Yes.
The strain on schools that are already really kind of at capacity, and a strain on roads and infrastructure and water and all the things. I mean, And Shona, you were just talking about this not too long ago, but just it's very difficult to affect that now.
It's very difficult to affect changes and things that were planned in the 80s and 90s. And I think that's something that is, when you're working with communities, when you are, you cannot just look at, this is what's great for us now.
Yeah.
I think the legislature, the city governments, you all have to be hyper-focused on, this is how we take care of the problem now, but how do we sustain it in the decades to come? Because it's easy to say, I won't be around then, so what difference does it make?
Or we couldn't imagine it would grow the way
we couldn't imagine that it would grow the way that it did. And I think that's part of it, is they just couldn't imagine that Frisco would now be what it is. But I have to be very conscious in the decisions that I'm making for our residents in not only what does it do today, but what does it do for the Frisco 20 years from now, and making sure that we're not tying hands in the future that in a negative way, that everything that we're doing is something that we can sustain, that we can uphold, that we can do, and we can be proud of 20 years from now.
Yeah, well, and there is this kind of like constraint because there is still a housing demand. Developers are still wanting to invest significantly in the area. And I think you even mentioned not too long ago the concept of negotiating with the developers to kind of reduce the density of those developments, but trying to give incentives otherwise to, kind of maintain their profitability. It all creates, you have to come up with really creative solutions, really, at this point.
I can remember having the conversation with the city manager, with George Purifoy at the time, probably a decade ago, and he said, never in my life did I think that we'd be talking about selling land in Frisco by the square foot. Like that would be the prices we would be talking about. That it would always be by, the acres, the half acres, that would be what we were talking about. But we got to a certain point where we're talking about selling land by the square foot and the pricing by the square foot. Wow. And when you get to that point, housing affordability is an issue. And some of that is, most of that is market driven, right? I mean,
sure.
it's, and I think both of us would stand in the place that I'm not going to get in there and impact markets because I believe very much in market driven.
Yeah.
But I think you just have to be mindful of those decisions and what they lead to and how then that crunch comes.
Well, and to that point, I mean, the value of a square foot,
Yeah.
and then of course, the rapid growth in property values is also translating into something that's not just a Texas debate, but really a national debate right now. The topic of property taxes, and we're seeing some states. I mean, some headlines around Florida trying to do things differently and experiment. I know, Jared, you and the legislature have been working to kind of create some areas of reform in that space also. Let's talk a little bit about property taxes. I mean, it's not an easy topic.
No.
I mean, investment in schools and, fire and safety all have to be funded in some way.
That's right.
And, if not a state income tax, what? But so no easy answers, but certainly a big debate going on about it now. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, make no mistake, this is the number one issue, I think, especially in Frisco, because we've been so successful as a community, because so many people want to come to Frisco. It has gotten very expensive to live there, and it's a burden on families.
Especially those who, maybe moved in or built their house 20 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And all of a sudden, there's this massive whiplash in property value. Great for their net worth.
That's right.
But that, when they
you're
built
not selling.
No,
Right.
yes, exactly right. When they built that house 20 years ago, that was at a different economic
Yes, it was.
bracket. Really.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we, at the state level, we don't set a property tax. We're constitutionally prohibited from doing so. We're constitutionally prohibited now from charging income tax or a tax on securities exchanges or a death tax. I mean, there's a lot of taxes that we're constitutionally prohibited from charging. So the lion's share of our money at the state level comes through the sales tax collections and the oil and gas industry and a few fees and things, but it's largely sales tax. And what we've done at the state level is we have turned that sales tax around, and we can't say that we cut property taxes because we don't charge one, but we spend that money to offset the tax collections at the local level. And what we've done is we've appropriated $51 billion towards that effort. It's the largest dollar figure of any state in history. It's the largest percentage of a budget of any state in history toward property tax relief. And we've done that by expanding the homestead exemption. When I got into office, the homestead exemption was $25,000, where you don't have to pay any school district property taxes on the first $25,000 in value of your home. Now that's up to $140,000 for everyone except seniors. It's $200,000. And then we've also put money into compressing the school district M&O property tax rate, meaning that we shove more money from the state level to offset what they would collect from the property taxpayer. And then we've also done a business personal property tax exemptions for our small businesses, making it to where no longer do they have a $2,500 exemption. That's a $125,000 exemption. So we've tried to do everything that we can at the state level to try to pump more sales tax revenue into the system to offset what people are paying property taxes. But number one, we can't keep doing that indefinitely because that $51 billion has to be appropriated every cycle now. But also, it's not having as significant of an effect as it needs to have on people because people still can't afford to live in some places in Texas.
Shona, can you kind of explain to people who might just not understand how it works? Like, what's an appraisal district, and how do all the pieces come together that result in a property tax bill?
It's a convoluted process, actually.
Yeah.
There is an appraisal district in your county that appraises the sale of the value of your home. And we can argue as to whether or not we think that the appraisal district should value that and should be the person who does that and what it should be based on.
There are three now. So we changed that recently. There are three elected officials now as of like 2 years ago, 2023.
Okay.
Where on the appraisal board themselves, there's three elected positions. They're countywide.
Okay.
But that is a brand new thing with the appraisal districts.
Okay. And I think that will feed into that because, certainly as the valuations are increasing, and if they're saying that the value of your home has gone up at the cap level of 10%. This year, every year at the max point. That's arguable as to whether that's really the case, whether it should be based on the actual market values of sales and all of that. And those are all solutions that need to be looked at and addressed as to how often they can appraise your home, how often they can raise, what's the percentage they can do. What happens then is that valuation comes to the city, and then the city says, this is the property, this is the tax rate we need in order to collect enough revenue to handle all the things that we're required to do with the core services of a city. Maintaining public safety is usually over 50% of your annual budget. And then beyond that, it's, the roads, the parks, all of those things. I will say this, your city portion of your taxes is usually less than 20% of your entire property tax bill. The huge portion of your property tax bill goes into the school district and goes to your school system. And one of the things that we've talked about is that, first of all, I pay the taxes in Frisco. So when people say, where are you with the rate of tax? I don't like it either, because I pay those. I'm not living in a different town and assessing a rate that I think is the right rate. I'm paying that rate. But when they pump in $51 billion back into the property tax relief, they're pumping it back into the school districts to lower that rate of it. The city doesn't get that portion. So we are not getting any relief from the state, from the mandates that we have on us of things that we have to provide and things that we have to do and those things that we're required to do. And that is a crunch. It's very difficult for us to manage the budget that is required in a fast-growing city just to take care of enough police officers and firefighters. That is in itself a huge burden to make sure that that's taking place without raising the rate. And there's no easy answers to that.
And when you were on city council, y'all did a homestead deal and all that.
We initiated the first homestead exemption. We kept the rate flat. Now, you can say that, you keep the rate flat or you lower the rate, but when your value is going up on your home, your tax burden is still going up. And that's the difficult part, that we've actually got to figure out ways to do real relief for taxpayers, that it's not just, we kept your rates the same, but your value went up, so it didn't matter. And we're going to have to plan for how to do that when the growth slows down. I do think one of the ways to really impact that is to increase your commercial property tax base. The more that you bring in the commercial businesses, that is going to help lower the burden that's on the residential owner. And so there really has to be a balance of that. And that's the struggle too, when you talk about how do you manage density of homes and density of businesses coming in. It offsets it. Rooftops are expensive. So if you can bring in more commercial property tax base, that takes some of the burden off of the homes.
But it's all a jigsaw puzzle, right? Because the more incentive you provide to businesses, perhaps in commercial property tax relief, the more likely they are to build businesses and create jobs there. And so it's all, tied together.
It's using every tool that's in the toolbox, but keeping focused on, if you do something to penalize business growth, that's not going to happen. If you do something that your tax rate's too high for your residents, that's not going to you're not going to attract people to come in. And there is that, it's a constant shifting of how do you piece it all together and use every tool that's in your toolbox to make it beneficial and workable for the community as a whole.
I heard you say something not too long ago, Shona, about the concept of, Frisco has certainly exploded in growth. No one's saying we shouldn't continue to grow in Frisco, but does it have to be at that same rate? Can it be at a more quality level of growth, more measured growth, which might give you the opportunity then, in that sense, to kind of pull a lever on some of those commercial opportunities?
Yeah, I think we have the opportunity now to be a little choosier and a little more selective in what we're doing. We don't have to incentivize businesses that want to come. They can absolutely come, and it's a great place for them to build, but we don't have to incentivize every single project now. Yeah. And I think the key in that is making the standards high enough where people want to be there, but they also know that the other businesses that are going to come in are going to have those same standards. And I like to use the phrase that we're focused on better, not just bigger. You are going to get bigger. That horse is out of the barn. People want to be there. We certainly don't want a dying community where people are leaving. So we're going to get bigger. but we can focus on how do we do it better. And that's something that we are certainly looking at for the next 10 years and 20 years, that as we finish out this growth, how do we focus on the better part instead of just the bigger parts?
Yeah. We've got to switch topics on us here as we're kind of coming towards the end of our time. But, so much of the country seems so polarized these days, right? I mean, the extremes on all sides. I'm not showing up to Thanksgiving dinner because of the way a family member voted. I mean, all the kinds of crazy things we hear about and experience. I'm sure we've all experienced in our own personal lives. But I wanted to just kind of give you all an opportunity. I mean, well-intentioned, well-educated, respectful people can disagree on topics, and that be okay. And I know the two of you have known each other for a long time and have a friendship, but at the same time have not always agreed on points. I don't mean to just expose that in front of everybody here.
But not always disagreed is an understatement.
Not always agreed. So. Not always agreed.
We didn't even vote for each other a couple of times.
Oh, cheers.
Low
You're
blow.
not saying that. You always voted for me.
As far as you know.
What happens in the ballot box.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But no, it's honestly I don't know. It seems like working together these days is, a rare thing and almost looked down upon.
Yeah.
You two have worked really hard at being able to work together and maintain your relationship and friendship and have hard conversations. Can you talk a little bit about that? Again, not trying to expose y'all or anything.
No, look, I think it's a great story to tell. I mean, I think that, Shona and I, Shona didn't support me in my first race, for state rep. And I remember very distinctly meeting with her at her office and sitting in a chair and her pulling a chair up and really, trying to dive into the issues and why do you believe this and why do you believe that? But, I became the state representative, and ever since then, she's been committed to working with me because I'm the guy in that chair at this moment in time. I'm the one that is holding that seat at this point in time. And, same with her. She was on city council, and she was one of the decision makers there. And quite frankly, one of the leaders representing the city of Frisco to the region and to the state. That was entrusted to her because she was really good at it. And we always found a way to come back together and to work through issues, not because we would necessarily change the other's mind, but we would have a better understanding of where that person came from. Yeah. And we would be able to sit down as adults and have a conversation. We're not just blasting each other on social media, which happens far too often today. Yeah. And I think it's just a great story, quite frankly, in leadership and her leadership. And it's why I support her for mayor. One of the reasons is because, number one, she's got the right experience. But number two, I know she's the right person to go sit down across the table from someone and figure it out. And so much of leadership is doing just that.
And that takes courage.
Oh, yeah.
And I would say we agree on more than we disagree on.
Oh, 100%.
And we always have. But Absolutely. I think part of the rub that happens is you disagree with somebody in one area and then you write them off. Yeah. And first of all, when he did come in to sit with me that first time in my office, I mean, he was this young guy and he was all full of,
idealistic
things. And but he was able to answer every question I asked him. And as we continue to have the conversation, and I think what we've said is we always kept coming back to the table. We were always willing to come to the table and have the conversation. And even if we disagreed on the issue, to say, okay, I disagree with you on that. I'm not really in the same position you are, but I do agree with you on A, B, C, and D. So let's talk about all those other things that we agree on and let's work together on those things. And that was how that kind of interaction started. But there was two pieces of it. That one, I always knew he was prepared. I knew he wasn't coming to the table with just random stuff. He was coming prepared. And I think he would be the first to tell you, if you're going to sit across the table from Shona, you better be prepared because I'm going to be prepared. Yeah. And I owed that to the residents to make sure that I was researched and educated on the issue so that when I went to discuss them with anyone, I was prepared. And as that, we grew to respect each other because we could always say, you know what, I know where your heart is coming from. And I know really that your intention is to do the right thing. And if I can believe that your intention is to do the right thing, then we can work together on that. And that really was where that friendship came from. And it's grown since then. That, I mean, we still pick up the phone with each other and go, Okay, like, hey.
Jared's grin cracks me up.
And I think you said this earlier.
Because it's usually her calling me.
I think we still call each other up and go, all right, look. But we have such respect for each other in that process. And I think that's what's lacking in other places, right? Is just coming to a place of respect.
Yeah.
And if you can respect the other person on the other side to say, I don't agree with you, but I can be respectful, I can be an adult, and I can continue to have a conversation, we would all be so much better off. And I will say that in the end, I owe that to the residents that elect me. I owe it to the residents to, no matter what position someone's coming from, I owe it to them to be willing to sit across the table from anyone to have that conversation and to try to find a way to collaborate and work with them, because that's what they've elected me to do. And that if they elect me again, when they elect me again for mayor to run that city, it will be my responsibility to work with anybody that comes across the table from me.
And that's also how you learn. I mean, none of us know everything about everything. I mean, we're dealing with very complex issues. We're dealing with things that are going to affect people for decades to come. We mentioned earlier and used the example of the multifamily zoning from the 80s and 90s in Frisco and how that plays a role in the 2020s in Frisco, right? So the decisions that we're making, these are big deals. We can't just take a populist view or whatever's hot on social media or whatever point I think people want to hear and go with that, because these decisions matter. These roles that we're in matter. And while we're stewards of the positions that we have, we owe it to the people to make the best decision possible. And you can't do that if you're in an echo chamber on Facebook or on Twitter or on social media. You can't do it if you're only talking to people that agree with you 100% of the time. You've got to do that through sometimes difficult conversations. And I think that that's something that I've grown to respect about Shona, and why I believe that she's the right person to lead Frisco forward, is because she's not only willing to do that within the community of Frisco, but she's willing to do that with our regional partners and our state partners and even our federal partners. And all of those things are going to make Frisco stronger moving forward as we enter into the next phase.
I was thinking back with our conversation recently with Senator Cornyn, and the challenges facing us in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, absolutely have to be coordinated from like the hyper local level to the national level. When you talk about the advancements in AI, you talk about how the investments required in technology and the war against, cyber crime, and all of that requires deep coordination from training and kind of upskilling resources and ensuring we have the right incentives for small businesses, for people to hang up their shingle and say, I'm going to start my own plumbing business, and I'm going to be a welder and help build the infrastructure required for the next stage of growth. It's all tied together. And even though most people like to talk about a lot of the national dynamics, which are the ones that dominate the news, it feels to me more and more these days that the more local, state and local engagement is really where we're establishing the path for the future. And so as people are looking to this region and saying, gosh, how do we create policies that help create that kind of growth? Any final summary from y'all about takeaways or lessons learned that people might take home with them?
I think Jared had some really good points when he talked about the complex issues and leading for the future, right?
Yeah.
But you also said something that I think is such a key piece. And so people know, I actually voted for Jared when I still lived in his district. So the people are worried about that part of it. But you mentioned about being good stewards. And I think if you look at the policies that you're making as an elected official at the state level, at the local level, or at any level, and think about the fact that you are a steward for that time. And it's not about they elected me, it's all about me. It's more about I set my vision for what I believe this community should do, and people agree with that and buy into that. But I am a steward of the community that I lead and I've been given. And if I can look at this role and the policies that I make as being a good steward of that, then I think that sets us up for success even more so. And that allows, I think people see that at the local level, but we talk about it all the time. your politics the most important ones to you should be the ones that are out your front door. And that's your local ones and your state ones, because that's who's interacting with what happens on your everyday life more than anything else. And so get involved, learn who they are, learn who's leading your community, learn who your state representatives are, and build relationships with them so that you can have an impact in the things that matter to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, I've served at the local level on a city council, absolutely loved it. I love serving, as a state legislator. I can't imagine going to Congress or any of the federal offices. I get so frustrated. I think most people do get so frustrated with Washington, D.C. It seems so divisive. It seems like they really don't do anything ever, no matter which party is in power or anything. It's so frustrating, at least from a legislative standpoint, from a congressional standpoint, right? But at the state level and at the local level, I've got a laundry list of policy wins that we've done at the state level to make Texas more vibrant, to thrive economically, to make our communities more safe, whether it's through border security or whether it's, preventing hostile foreign nations from buying our land, whether it's, property tax reform. I have a long list of policy wins that I can point to where I honestly believe that we have made Texas better and stronger for future generations. And quite frankly, it's the same at the local level. At the local level, whether it's something as monotonous as picking up the trash or making sure the sewer and the water systems work or building the roads, all of those things are critically important to our businesses and to our families. And so your state and local governments where rubber meets the road, everybody wants to get frustrated watching CNN or Fox News about the R's and the D's going back and forth and fighting against each other, and nothing gets done. But they're not paying attention enough to what's going on at the local level and at the state level. And so it's very frustrating, quite frankly, because we have such good people serving in so many of these positions.
That's right.
And they truly impact your everyday life. And so it is truly an honor to serve and to be able to have this opportunity. And I think to even more so to be able to do it from Frisco and from North Texas and particularly in my case, Denton County, where there is so much opportunity there. It is just the coolest thing in the world to walk into that state capitol that was built in the 1800s, to walk onto that House floor and have a vote for the people of Texas from Denton County. Yeah. It is a remarkable responsibility, and I love it.
Well, thank you so much for serving in your roles and for all that you're doing for your constituents and the state. And I would also just say thanks to all of you who are serving on your Homeowners Association Board of Directors. My community, our HOA board partners with 12 surrounding HOA boards, working with other people, partnership to pool resources and continue to cultivate community. So for all of you who are doing that, we also want to say thank you. Appreciate you joining us today. And we'll see you next time on the Home Front.
Thanks for tuning into the Home Front. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and connect with us on social media as we explore the tech and trends shaping tomorrow's communities. Until next time, keep your tools smart and your vision forward.